Welcome to the Generative Edge, the podcast that keeps you up to date with the latest news and events in the world of generative AI. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a consultant at Deloitte Central Europe.
I'm Brandon, and I'm the Natural Language Processing and Generative AI Practice Lead for Deloitte Central Europe.
And I'm excited because today we are going to talk about maybe the hype thing that is being discussed in the world of generative AI right now, and that is Agentic AI.
Yeehaw.
Yeah, so I would love to just start because honestly, anytime you open LinkedIn or anything that's like related to generative AI at this point, Agentic AI comes up in the conversation. It is everywhere.
It's in job descriptions. It's in RFP. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I would love to just kind of take a super high level look at this just to get our audience familiar with stuff. So let me ask you the very generic question. What is Agentic AI?
Okay. Let's see if I can sort of condense this down. Okay. So earlier software that used generative AI basically had something where you had like an input. So I would type something in, you have the large language model, and then it generates an output. That's the simplest chain, basically.
Yeah.
So input, output. In software systems, it got a little bit more complicated over the past couple of years because we needed to do more complicated things. So this was what was described as a chain or a tool calling chain, where you would have some kind of input. It goes to the large language model, and it needs to give you some kind of structured output, like what is the age of the person, what is the current year, what is the current year minus the birth date of the person, so what is their age or something like that, something slightly more complicated. And in order to do that, you had to code out tools, what are called tools, which might be like a search, so it could be connected to Bing, or it could be connected to Google or Amazon Kendra or Elasticsearch or something. Basically, these tools connect a large language model's output with an actual piece of software, and then return whatever the response is to the user. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this kind of layering of software over LLMs and things like that. So we're still in the realm of familiar at this point.
For sure.
Okay.
Yes.
So where do the agents come in?
Yeah. So agents came in as a way of basically skipping the tool calling part, or at least keeping it there, but making it so that the large language model is making more decisions than it was before. And that's why they call it agentic. So agentic meaning that the large language model has agency to decide whether or not to use specific tools, what to do about the responses that it gets from those tools if it's using them, and then maybe in some cases even coding its own software to generate responses for the user. So you might have a user question or some kind of input, goes to the large language model, and then what happens is that it makes some observations. Those observations are listed out, and it kind of sends those observations to itself and then tries to process, okay, based on those observations, what do I need to do now? Okay, step by step, I'm going to do step 1, step 2, step 3. And some of those steps might include generating more text, or they might involve calling one of those tools. So it's essentially just how much agency is actually given to the large language model and where it lies in this whole chain of command, essentially, in the software. But other than that, it's not really that much different from the things we were doing a year ago. So when we talk about agentic AI, it's not super revolutionary. It's really just a different way of organizing how a large language model fits into your software architecture.
Okay. Because I kind of feel like the agentic workflows that I have seen in my everyday research and things like that, it seems like the agents themselves, and we'll just refer to them as agents at this point.
Yeah.
It seems like they're doing specific tasks. So like, for example, you would see like a routing agent or like a decision agent. So is that just like a title that we're describing the underlying functions and decisions it's making? Like, how would you, describe that or organize that?
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you say workflow, because this is terminology that's used by LangChain, which is like an open source software library for working with large language models. And they split architectures for software design with large language models into two camps. One is workflows, and the other one is agent.
There we go.
So a workflow, I'm just going to read from their website now. So the LLM is embedded in predefined code paths. So you have something called called like prompt chaining, where you just have a large language model that generates more prompts, gets sent back to itself, and then it generates some output. You have parallelization, where you have some kind of input and then it generates multiple responses and sends those to different places. And that's it. That's the whole workflow.
Okay.
You have other stuff like routing. This is that routing workflow that you were talking about, where you say, okay, maybe the user is saying like, I need help resetting my password. And the large language model is fulfilling the role of the router, deciding whether or not that request is going to go to point A or point B. So point A might be software reset, point B might be I forgot my username or something. So it says, oh, the user is doing this, send the data to point A. Okay. That's a router. And then an agent is basically handling from end to end. So the large language model directs its own actions based on environmental feedback. So it's going to make large language model calls to itself, to different tools, get the feedback, and then generate output at the end. So all of this is very technical, by the way. So for lay people who have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm so sorry. This is like really, really technical. But for the most part, if you see Agentic AI or something, it's really just like how you organize how the data flows and nothing more. Yeah.
So I want to take a step back for a moment, because on this podcast, I remember you and I talking about the fact, or maybe now it's not a fact, that Gen AI solutions, they don't make decisions. Yeah. Right? Like we've said that that's not a great use case for generative AI. Like that's something obviously a human would be much better suited for. It sounds like that conversation has changed in the event of all of this agentic AI. So would you say that's the case or not really?
I think it's getting slightly better, but the right question to ask would be, what kind of decisions do you mean? Okay. So are we deciding about who to reject for a mortgage, or are we deciding whether a chatbot is going to help someone reset their password? Those are very different decisions with different levels of agency required and responsibility, right? So I think like low responsibility, very low risk decision making would be maybe okay at this point, depending on the subject, of course. Right. But if something is going to like negatively impact the lives of hundreds or maybe thousands of people, depending on how it's deciding, that's probably not a use case that you should be using language models for, at least not yet.
Yeah. So there's still maybe the ethics of AI, the trustworthiness of generative AI, all the normal checks and balances that we talk about with Gen AI still apply to agentic AI.
Exactly. So it's really interesting that you mention ethics. So it's something that we've talked about in the past, but I was thinking, literally this morning. So my degree's in linguistics, and one of the things that we study is how language makes use of duplicated phrases, of unstructured word order, of ambiguity, because language is, by and large, it makes use of ambiguity in certain ways to either elicit a response like a laugh or to command something. And those are things that large language models may not really have the ability to do, or the enough agency to actually do it. Okay. Let me break that down. So when I say something, and this is based on speech act theory, which was headed by John Searle and John Austin in the 60s. It's been around forever.
We're getting into the nerdy linguistics part of the podcast.
This is my favorite. This is my favorite part. I love this topic. So
let him cook. Let him cook.
My linguistics professor is going to be so happy that I remember this. So we study speech acts. And what a speech act is it's separated into three different things. What I say, literally just the words and the sound that come out of my mouth when I speak to you, that's what we refer to as a locution. So I might say, man, it's really hot in here. So what I've said is it's really hot in here. Then we have an illocution, which is what I actually intend to communicate with my words. So maybe I've communicated that in a place where like the heater is on. So I really want you to either turn the heater off or open the window, but I didn't say it explicitly. That was my intention. I hope that you've understood what I tried to say.
The subtext
exactly.
kind of vibe. Okay.
And then you have the perlocution, which is how you understand my intent. So did you understand that I'm really hot and I want you to open the window? Or did you understand that I'm just complaining and you're like, ugh, this person's complaining again. Why doesn't he take off his coat or something? So you've received the wrong intent. In this case, and this goes back to also something that OpenAI released a week ago, which I'll get to, is that large language models don't have that context. And when you try to talk to a large language model, it's the same medium as talking with everybody else. You're using language, and language can be misunderstood. It can be duplicated. It can be not quick and to the point or poorly understood. And so what OpenAI calls this is a misaligned goal error.
Okay.
And they find that it's really common when interacting with their products or with large language models in general. People try to do something, and a very common error is that the large language model will not understand it correctly and then perform a task based on what it thinks it understood, but is actually something else. And this happens with people all the time.
I was going to say, this sounds like a familiar challenge, working in an international environment, using idioms and different expressions. Like what I'm specifically saying is not necessarily interpreted the correct way that I meant it to be.
Exactly.
So we have a language barrier, et cetera.
And when you're in the office and you say something and somebody misunderstands, what do?
I ask follow-up questions and get clarification. Yeah.
Exactly. But you can't do that in a software.
Right.
Like if you've automated a software end to end, there is no, back and forth unless you somehow build it in, which is really complex and difficult to do. And that's just something to be aware of. The other type of error is an execution error. This one is basically what we call hallucinations, or it's related to it. So you send your intended task, the large language model tries to understand it, maybe understands it correctly, but then falters in the execution of that. And it still happens all the time, of course. So it might generate the wrong code, or it might do it incorrectly. And if you put that into, again, an automated software solution, there is no gate check to make sure that it has executed it properly, because you built into the software that uncertainty of like how it's going to be executed. So I see agentic AI being put into lots of stuff, but I still see a place for non-agentic AI because it's just too risky to leave it up to the decision-making capability when you want something to be performed thousands of times a day in exactly the same way. It doesn't make sense to give it that level of uncertainty, right?
Okay. So the fact is, even if agentic AI is helping us to make decisions, to, automate workflows, work faster, smarter, human in the loop is still the key to
Super
all
important.
of these software solutions, et cetera.
Yeah. Maybe not all, but most.
Well, that's true. Maybe not all.
Yeah. Just on the topic of decision making, right? Yeah. So
agentic AI is still not putting all of us out of work or anything like that. But I do see that it's a really interesting, maybe logical development that we would want, like you said, these low stakes decision-making aspects of workflows, or if I'm using that term correctly, workflows, automations, in order to, again, streamline all these processes. Like that's the point of all technology and softwares, right? Is to make our lives better.
Yeah.
And so if this is the next iteration of what that looks like, that's really cool. But also understanding that, of course, there's limitations and what it can do and what it still needs human support with.
Yes. And the good news is for developers, there's actually like a ton of tools for working directly with like what's considered agentic AI. So there's like Hugging Face's small agents, which is a library just for like, you can literally in 5 lines of code create something that will look up on the internet things and then generate a response for you running a large language model on your laptop. So I did this just last week and I just asked it who I was, and it went to, the search engine. It collected a bunch of information about me, and then it described me in perfect detail, which was really creepy.
That is creepy.
I mean, if it had taken 1,000 lines of code, maybe it would have been less creepy, but since it only took like 5, I was like, okay, maybe, that's
you're very
crazy.
Online, I guess.
I'm very online, yeah.
That's an interesting use case. Who am I? So that's probably a good note to end on, because I don't know how in-depth we want to get into your online persona, at least on the podcast.
Oh, no.
But you guys know where to find us anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry for being so technical. If you've made it this far in the listening experience, thank you so much for being here. So remember, generate responsibly.
Thank you for listening to The Generative Edge, a Deloitte Central Europe and AWS production. Your hosts are Brandon Eychaner, Vyasaraj Kulkarni, and Donovan Spronk. Our show is executive produced by Stephanie Cohen, Vanch Luthra, Ian Masters, and the Deloitte studio in Prague. Head writers are Stephanie Cohen and Brandon Eychaner. Our sound and audio engineer is Wojtek Krasa, who also serves as our editor and videographer. Michal Trusina is our graphic designer. Our marketing and social media managed by Stephanie Cohen and the Deloitte studio in Prague. And our theme song was written and produced by Jakub Flaszek. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.